Xanthea Limberg via Skype. Ms. Limberg, thanks so much for speaking to us.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, it must be a huge sigh of relief after months and months of talking about day zero to finally be able to lift these water restrictions. But tell us how we got to this point.
Well, it is definitely a substantial relief that we can provide to residents at this stage. And it's as a result of dam levels slowly recovering. The latest dam levels as of today is sitting at 69.1%. So that recovery means that we are in a far greater position than we were last year. And coupled with that, we've seen also residents working with the city by continuing water savings. And so water consumption has also remained quite stable and has actually reduced since last week. And so coupled with this, as well as the city's interventions, we have been able to offer this gradual relief for residents by reducing the water restriction level as well as the tariffs as of the 1st of October.
So as the City of Cape Town, you've indicated that, of course, there will be a relief in the pricing as well. But with all the other measures that you've put in place, you had, for example, put in place a PR team to help you communicate your message and strategy around day zero. What is the latest in that regard? Are they still going to continue, or have those contracts now come to an end?
Those contracts came to an end at the beginning of 2018, but the city continues to communicate on a weekly basis around the state of dam levels as well as other interventions that the city is implementing. We provide regular progress updates around other new water augmentation projects that the city is working on, and we also, on a continuous basis, provide further insights into how we are doing and faring in terms of consumption. And so the city will embark on continuous communication, because this particular experience around the drought has taught us significant lessons, and we need to ensure that we take those on board as we develop a far more water resilient and water sustainable city into the future.
Let's talk about some of those lessons that you have learned.
So some of those lessons that we have learned is that we have to diversify our water supply, and we cannot be dependent on surface water in the form of rainfall because of the great unpredictability in terms of rainfall and the fact that South Africa at large is a water scarce region. And so the city is planning to substantially augment our water supply by tapping into non-surface water solutions and implementing this incrementally to ensure that we can build up levels of assurance in terms of new water supply, but in the same breath, ensure that we implement this in a financially responsible manner, because the cost of new water augmentation, particularly from non-surface water solutions, is also incredibly expensive, and so it's about balancing all of those needs.
And let's talk about the cost, because I'm sure many Cape Townians watching right now are particularly interested in this. So how is that going to look going forward? Well,
one of the key things that we obtain from our experiences in implementing new water augmentation projects is that the cost for new surface water solutions varies quite a great deal. So if we look at surface water, for example, which is in the form of natural rainfall, we obtain that from the National Department of Water and Sanitation at around 5 Rand per kiloliter. But when we implemented the temporary desalination plants at different locations within Cape Town, the cost per kiloliter was something close to 40 Rand per kiloliter. And so this is sort of the price variance that we have to plan and adapt and adopt going forward. And so the city is looking at a sustainable augmentation plan going into the future to ensure that we can leverage the expenses of non-water surface solutions and implement them in a way that mitigates the impact on residents through the tariff. And by doing so, we are looking at a mix of not only temporary but long-term large-scale desalination plants based on learnings from other parts of the world, as well as external experts, which we have received, and this will then inform our long-term strategy going into the future. But we're not working in isolation, because the water supply system is ultimately managed by the National Department of Water and Sanitation. And we need to ensure alignment at a national as well as a provincial level, because we are dependent on all users in the system working effectively and cooperatively.
Ms. Limberg, what percentage of that cost of desalination was actually passed on to the consumer?
So we opted to implement 3 desalination plants between the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018. And so we did see a massive increase in the tariff, and this is part of the reason why we implemented the level 6 tariffs, which saw the price of water go up to 28 Rand, close to 29 Rand per kiloliter. And this came from a general cost of water being around 4 Rand per kiloliter previously, when we were in a non-drought situation. So the cost of that increase was largely going towards investing in additional water augmentation schemes such as desalination projects.
Still doesn't answer my question directly, because I wanted to know what percentage of that process was actually passed on to the consumer.
So the consumer has to pay through tariffs, and this tariff is not only for new water augmentation, but also for the maintenance of the existing reticulation infrastructure. So the tariff went to a significant portion of the tariff went to the fixed and the ordinary business of water and sanitation, and the top up or the increase went to funding new water augmentation schemes. And so we're looking at a 60-40 split in terms of the tariff paying 40% towards new augmentation and 60% towards maintaining the existing water and sanitation reticulation infrastructure.
Okay, if we're trying to keep it simple, you spoke about 40 Rand per kiloliter. How much of that was passed on to the consumer?
So all of that would be passed on to the consumer, but the city obviously ensured that we tapped into a range of water augmentation sources. So other than just obtaining water from desalination plants, we were also still, during the period of the drought, sourcing water from the dams through the National Department of Water and Sanitation. But we were balancing our demand through the other alternative water sources that we implemented. And this included tapping into rivers, accelerating extraction from springs, as well as water augmentation through desalination and aquifers. So it was about balancing where we drew water from during a period of drought so that we could minimize the impact of drawdown on dam levels.
You had quite sophisticated machinery PR-wise. Did you communicate that as clearly to your consumers in the city of Cape Town?
We did attempt to ensure that we use multiple platforms to communicate, because as part of undergoing any sort of extreme drought, you have to ensure that your consumers, who are our residents at large, form part of that strategy. As we have learned from international experiences, the most effective way of managing a drought is to drive demand management, and this is through reducing water consumption. So we did that through the communications campaign that the city drove. But on the other side, we also obviously didn't stop efforts in building new water augmentation to add new water into the system. And so our communications campaign was not only centered around driving the message of reducing consumption and encouraging savings, we also used the communication efforts to inform residents around the new water augmentation projects that we were implementing and the costs thereof.
I guess the short answer there is no, Ms. Limberg. But just a final question, because we are out of time. With regard to the path going forward and desalination plants, is that part of the mix? And will the Cape Town residents still foot the bill for that 100%?
Well, it's important to note that the National Department of Water and Sanitation remain the authority for bulk water supply. And so we will, as the city and like any other municipality, be obtaining the bulk of our water in the short to medium term from surface water through the National Department of Water and Sanitation. The city has, however, believed it to be necessary, given the impact of the drought, to diversify our water supply and actually expand on our competencies and roles and responsibility by investing in new water augmentation. And this will include desalination, drilling into aquifers, as well as water reuse, which is recycling of wastewater, and tapping into other forms of water sources such as springs and rivers. So we're looking at a far more balanced approach when we are planning for our water future, and it will look at all of those sources, and it will obviously ensure that we implement this as and when is necessary, and bearing in mind the cost, and therefore it needs to be done in a responsible manner.
Well, thank you so much. That was Xanthea Limberg, a Mayoral Committee member for Informal Settlements, Water and Waste Services and Energy in the city of Cape Town.